The legend of human warriors. For generations, the Vranthi people told stories about the human warriors, stories of fearless fighters who could not be stopped. They moved like ghosts, fought like demons, and never surrendered. But no one had seen a human in over 100 years. To the younger Vranthi, humans were nothing more than a legend, just bedtime stories told to scare young warriors. Zura was one of those young warriors. She never believed in myths. She was a scout for the Vranthi Empire, trained to survive in the wild, to track enemies, and to report danger. But she did not fear danger. She believed in strategy, in weapons, in strength. Myths had no place in war. She had been sent on a mission with her squad to scout a newly discovered planet. Their task was simple: find resources, check for any threats, and report back to the main fleet. The planet was quiet, covered in thick jungles, with no sign of intelligent life. But something felt wrong. Zura adjusted the scanner on her wrist and looked around. The dense trees whispered with the wind, the strange blue leaves rustling softly. The air smelled fresh, but there was an unnatural silence. No birds, no insects, just stillness. "This place is empty," one of her squadmates, Kren, muttered. "No signs of enemies." "Stay alert," Zura warned. "Empty places can hide the worst dangers." The squad moved carefully through the jungle, their armor blending into the shadows. They were trained warriors, ready for anything, or so they thought. Then it happened. A loud roar shook the trees. The ground trembled. Before Zura could react, something massive crashed through the jungle. The Krogan. The enemy force was brutal and merciless. Towering reptilian creatures, standing twice as tall as a Vranthi, with armor like skin and weapons designed to destroy everything in their path. "We're under attack," Kren shouted, raising his rifle. The squad fired, their energy weapons lighting up the dark jungle. But the Krogan kept coming. Bullets bounced off their thick hides. One of them swung a massive blade, cutting through a Vranthi warrior like paper. Zura's heart pounded. This wasn't just a skirmish. This was a massacre. "Fall back," she ordered. They ran. The jungle was thick, but the Krogan were faster. Zura's mind raced. There had to be a way out, but the Krogan were everywhere. One by one, her squadmates fell. Some were crushed under heavy boots, others were sliced apart. Zura ran, her breath heavy, her legs burning. She refused to die here. She dove behind a fallen tree, gripping her knife. The sound of heavy footsteps grew closer. A Krogan warrior, 3 times her size, stomped forward. His red eyes locked onto her hiding spot. He grinned, raising his blade. Zura knew this was the end. She closed her eyes, waiting for the strike. Then, a sound. A new sound. Not a scream, not a roar, but something else. Something cold. Something deadly. Gunfire. But not Vranthi gunfire. Not the weak energy blasts of her people. This was different. Faster. Louder. More powerful. Zura opened her eyes just in time to see the Krogan warrior jerk backward. Blood sprayed from his chest. His body trembled, then collapsed, lifeless. More shots echoed through the jungle. The Krogan turned, confused. Their attackers were unseen, moving like shadows. One by one, the massive warriors fell, unable to react in time. Zura barely breathed. Who were these people? No, not people. Warriors. She crawled out from her hiding spot, gripping her knife, scanning the trees. Then she saw them. Tall figures covered in black armor. They moved fast, too fast for the Krogan to counter. They fired sleek, deadly weapons, their movements sharp and precise. And then the battle was over. The Krogan were dead. The jungle was silent again. One of the warriors turned toward her. His helmet was smooth, featureless. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and calm. "You're safe now." Zura's mind raced. These warriors were strong, deadly, fearless. They had taken down an entire Krogan attack force in minutes. She took a slow step forward, her heart pounding. Who are you?" she asked. The warrior reached up and tapped his helmet. The visor pulled back, revealing a face she had only ever seen in stories. A human. Her blood ran cold. The legends were true. The myths were real. And now she was standing face to face with the most feared warriors in the galaxy. The Shadow Warriors appear. Zura's breath caught in her throat. She had spent her whole life hearing the old war stories, the myths of the unstoppable human warriors, ghosts of battle who struck without warning and vanished like shadows. But they were just that, myths, or so she had believed. Now, standing before her, were those very warriors. The battlefield was still, the thick jungle air heavy with the scent of blood and burning metal. The Krogan lay dead, their massive bodies sprawled across the ground, some with holes burned clean through their armored chests, others lying motionless with slit throats. Zura felt the hairs on her arms rise. She had seen battles before. She had fought in them. But never like this. This wasn't war. This was an execution. The warrior closest to her stepped forward. His armor was unlike anything she had ever seen. Black, sleek, and smooth, built for both stealth and combat. No glowing energy shields, no flashing lights like Vranthi armor. Just pure function, efficient, deadly. "You're safe now," the warrior said, his voice deep and controlled. Zura swallowed hard. The man reached up and tapped the side of his helmet. With a smooth hiss, the visor retracted, revealing his face. Zura gasped. A human. His features were sharp, rugged, his skin tanned from what she assumed were years of battle. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned her quickly, as if assessing whether she was a threat. She had never seen a human before. No living Vranthi had. The old stories said they were terrifying, ruthless, warriors bred for war. But this one, his expression wasn't cruel. It was hard, yes, but there was something else in his eyes. Something Vranthi warriors never showed. Control. Not anger, not rage, just pure, focused control. Zura clenched her fists to keep her hands from shaking. The human studied her for a moment, then spoke again. "Captain Daniel Ross," he said, nodding slightly. "And you are?" Zura hesitated. The urge to run still clung to her bones. But where would she go? The jungle was filled with Krogan, and her squad was gone. If the humans wanted to kill her, they would have already done it. She straightened her back, trying to steady her voice. "Scout Zura of the Vranthi Empire." Ross's expression remained unreadable. He turned to the others, making a quick hand gesture. Instantly, the warriors around him shifted into formation, moving with eerie precision. Zura realized they had been scanning the area the whole time, checking for more threats, weapons still at the ready. One of the other humans spoke, his voice lower, rougher. "We need to move. Krogan don't attack in small numbers. More will come." Ross nodded. Agreed. He looked at Zura. "You're coming with us." Zura tensed. "I don't take orders from humans." Ross tilted his head slightly. "Would you rather take orders from the Krogan? Because they'll be here in less than 5 minutes." Zura's stomach twisted. She looked around at the bodies, at the jungle, at the thick smoke still rising from burning armor. She had a choice, stay and die, or follow the humans. She exhaled slowly. "Fine. But if you betray me..." Ross didn't even flinch. "You'll kill me." "Understood." With that, he turned and motioned for his team to move. The humans melted into the jungle like ghosts, their weapons at the ready. Zura hesitated, then followed. The ghosts of war. They moved fast. Faster than she expected. Despite their armor and weapons, the humans slipped through the jungle like they were part of it. No wasted movements, no unnecessary noise. Zura struggled to keep up. She had been trained in stealth, in tracking, But these warriors moved on an entirely different level. She had so many questions. How had they survived all these years? Where had they been? Why were they fighting the Krogan? She didn't dare ask. Not yet. The squad moved in perfect coordination, covering each other's backs, barely communicating. They didn't need words. It was as if they could read each other's thoughts. Zura's heart pounded. This was why they were legends. Ross suddenly raised a fist. Everyone froze. Zura instinctively pressed herself against a tree, her hand on her knife. Silence. Then, movement. Something big. Ross's second-in-command, a human named Reynolds, pulled out a device and checked the screen. Thermals picking up movement. Krogan hunting party. 20, maybe more. Zura felt her stomach drop. She had fought Krogan before, but never 20 at once. That wasn't a hunting party. That was an execution squad. They're searching for survivors, Reynolds continued. If we stay here, we're dead. Zura's fingers curled into a fist. This was bad. Ross, however, remained calm. We don't run. Zura turned sharply toward him. Are you insane? There's no way we fight 20 Krogan and live. Ross glanced at her. You think we're going to fight fair? He turned to his squad. Set the traps. The humans moved instantly, pulling out small, strange devices. They placed them in the trees, on the ground, in the underbrush. Zura watched, confused. What are those? Ross smirked. Surprises. The team took their positions, weapons ready. Zura's breath was unsteady. The Krogan were coming. They were outnumbered. And yet, the humans didn't look afraid. They looked like they had already won. And for the first time in her life, Zura wondered, maybe the old stories were true. Maybe humans really were the deadliest warriors in the galaxy. The truth about humans. Zura had always believed that fear was a weakness. She had been trained since childhood to be strong, to fight, to survive. But as she crouched behind thick jungle foliage, watching the silent, armored humans prepare for battle, she realized something. Fear was not weakness. Fear was wisdom. And right now, fear was screaming at her. The Krogan were coming. The humans had set traps. Small, strange devices hidden in the trees, under fallen leaves, even inside the corpses of their fallen enemies. Zura didn't know what they would do, but the way Captain Ross and his team moved told her one thing. They weren't planning to run. Ross knelt beside her, his dark eyes focused beyond the trees. He barely blinked. His rifle was steady in his hands, his breathing slow and controlled. "You've fought the Krogan before," he said quietly. Zura hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Ross finally glanced at her. "And how many of those fights have you won?" Zura clenched her jaw. She hated the answer. She hated the truth. "We retreat," she admitted. "We don't have the strength to face them head-on." Ross smirked slightly. "That's because you've been fighting like warriors." Zura frowned. "And what do you fight like?" Ross's expression darkened. "We fight like survivors." Before she could ask what that meant, the jungle came alive with the sound of heavy footsteps. The Krogan had arrived. The ambush. Zura peered through the leaves. At least 20 Krogan warriors stomped into the clearing, their massive reptilian forms glistening under the twin moons. Their armor was thick, their weapons large and brutal, blades that could cut through bone, heavy guns that could turn a Vranthi into dust. Zura's heart pounded. She had fought Krogan before, but never this many at once, and certainly not without a full squad at her back. The Krogan leader stepped forward, scanning the bodies of his fallen warriors, his massive head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. "They're here," he growled. For a moment, silence. Then, a loud beep. One of the bodies on the ground exploded, sending shrapnel and fire into the Krogan ranks. Screams filled the air as 3 of them were thrown backward, their bodies torn apart. Chaos erupted. The humans struck. Gunfire flashed in the darkness, but it wasn't wild. uncontrolled. It was precise. The humans aimed for weak points, joints, exposed flesh, the cracks in the Krogan armor. Zura had never seen anything like it. The Krogan roared, charging forward, but the humans didn't panic. They moved as one. Fast, silent, efficient. Ross fired 3 quick shots, each one finding its mark. One Krogan dropped instantly, the other 2 staggered. His squad followed suit, cutting down the enemy before they even had a chance to react. Zura's instincts screamed at her to join the fight, but she hesitated. These warriors weren't like Vranthi soldiers. They didn't charge. They didn't fight with pride. They fought with ruthlessness. A Krogan soldier spotted her and lunged. Zura barely had time to react before Ross tackled her to the ground. A second later, the ground where she had been standing exploded. She looked up, stunned. Ross had planted a charge there, just in case. He pulled her up roughly. Stay low, stay smart. Zura felt something strange inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Respect. The aftermath. Minutes later, the last Krogan fell. The jungle was silent once more. Zura stood in the middle of the battlefield, her heart still pounding. The humans had killed 20 elite Krogan warriors without losing a single one of their own. It was impossible. But it had happened. She turned to Ross. How? How did you do that? Ross wiped blood from his face and checked his weapon before answering. We've been fighting for a long time. Zura frowned. No one has seen humans in over 100 years. The war between our people ended long ago. So where have you been? Ross's jaw tightened. The other humans glanced at each other, as if sharing an unspoken thought. Finally, he spoke. Hiding. Surviving. Zura's mind raced. The legends said that humans were wiped out after the last Great War, that their homeworld was destroyed, that they had simply vanished. But they hadn't vanished. They had adapted. They had changed. Zura stared at the human warriors before her. Their weapons were not the same as before. Their tactics were different. The Vranthi had spent the last century believing the humans were gone. But now, standing here, watching them in action, she realized the truth. The humans had never been gone. They had just become something else, something deadlier. Zura exhaled slowly. She had spent her whole life believing humans were just a myth, a story told to make warriors dream of unbeatable enemies. Now she knew the truth. The myth was real, and she had just fought beside it. The escape through enemy territory. Zura ran. Branches whipped past her face, the thick jungle barely visible in the dim light of the twin moons. The scent of blood and gunpowder clung to the air, mixing with the damp earth beneath her boots. Her heart pounded, her breath ragged. Behind her, the humans moved like shadows, their footfalls nearly silent despite their heavy gear. Captain Ross was just ahead, his rifle gripped tightly in his hands. The others followed in perfect formation, weapons raised, scanning the darkness. They weren't running in fear. They were running with purpose. And Zura, she was running for her life. A deep, guttural roar echoed through the jungle. The Krogan were close, too close. Zura risked a glance over her shoulder. The burning wreckage of their ambush site was still visible through the trees, thick smoke curling into the night sky. The bodies of dead Krogan littered the ground, but it hadn't been enough. Ross had been right. The first wave was just a scouting party. Now, the real force was coming. And they were angry. "We need to move faster," Reynolds, Ross's second-in-command, muttered. Zura gritted her teeth. "There's a clearing ahead," she said. "If we cut through it, we can." Ross shot her a sharp look. "Open ground is a death sentence. Krogan have better night vision than us." "Then what's your plan?" Zura snapped. "Run until we collapse." Ross didn't stop running, didn't even look at her. "No, we make them collapse first." Before Zura could ask what that meant, Ross raised a fist. The entire squad skidded to a stop, vanishing into the underbrush. Zura hesitated, then ducked down beside them, pressing her back against a tree. The jungle was alive with sound. Crickets, distant howls, the whisper of the wind through the trees. But beneath it all, she could hear something else. Heavy footfalls, snarling voices. The Krogan were close. Ross didn't speak. He didn't give orders. He didn't need to. His squad already knew what to do. Zura barely breathed as the first Krogan appeared, stepping into the clearing ahead. His red eyes scanned the area, his massive blade glinting in the moonlight. Another followed, then another. There were dozens. Zura's fingers curled around the knife at her belt. She had faced Krogan before, but never while hiding, never in such a vulnerable position. She hated this feeling. She wanted to fight. But the humans, they didn't move. They didn't attack. They waited. Ross glanced at a small device on his wrist, then tapped it. A beep. Then, chaos. The ground beneath the Krogan exploded. Zura flinched as fire erupted, metal shrapnel slicing through the air. Several Krogans screamed as they were thrown backward, their massive bodies crashing against trees. The jungle came alive with gunfire. The humans struck fast, aiming for weak points, throats, joints, exposed flesh. They didn't waste bullets. Every shot was a kill shot. Zura had never seen anything like it. Her people fought with honor. The Krogan fought with brute force. But the humans, they fought with calculation. They knew exactly when to strike, exactly where to aim. They didn't just win battles. They ended them. Zura snapped out of her daze just in time to see a Krogan charging toward her. He was massive, his armor cracked but still intact, his beady eyes locked onto her. She moved without thinking, rolling to the side as his blade slammed into the tree where she had just been standing. In one fluid motion, she drew her knife and slashed at his exposed wrist. The blade cut deep, and the Krogan roared in pain. But he didn't go down. Zura barely had time to react before a gunshot rang out. The Krogan's head snapped back, a perfect hole between his eyes. He collapsed. Zura turned, breathing hard. Ross lowered his rifle. "Stay focused," he said simply, then turned back to the fight. Zura swallowed hard. She had never needed saving before. She didn't like it. But right now she wasn't sure if she had just been rescued by a warrior or a monster. The chase, the battle ended as quickly as it had started. The humans had lost no one. The Krogan had lost everything. Ross checked his wrist device again. More incoming. Bigger numbers this time. Reynolds let out a low whistle. "They're mad." "Let them be mad," Ross said. "We're moving." Zura felt herself tense. "Where are we going?" Ross looked at her. "Somewhere we can fight." Zura hesitated. She had never followed orders before. Not from her own commanders. Certainly not from a human. But she didn't have a choice. The squad moved again, deeper into the jungle, weaving through thick vines and towering trees. The Krogan weren't far behind, their guttural growls echoing through the darkness. "They're gaining," one of the humans muttered. "Let them," Ross said. Zura scowled. "You want them to follow us?" Ross smirked. "Of course." Zura's blood went cold. What kind of warriors were these people? The outpost. It took nearly an hour, but eventually, the jungle began to thin. The trees gave way to ancient ruins, stone structures covered in moss, vines curling around broken pillars. An old outpost, abandoned, forgotten. And now, their last stand. The humans moved quickly, setting up defenses, placing explosives, finding vantage points. They had done this before, many times. Zura watched, uneasy. What is this place? Ross loaded his rifle. Home, for now. Zura narrowed her eyes. We should keep moving. Ross shook his head. No, we don't run. Zura exhaled sharply. Then what do we do? Ross looked at her, his expression unreadable. We win. The final stand at the outpost. Zura pressed herself against the cold stone of the ruined outpost, her pulse pounding in her ears. The jungle around them was eerily quiet, but she knew the silence was a lie. The Krogan were coming. The humans had wasted no time fortifying the ancient structure. Captain Ross and his team moved with ruthless efficiency, setting up traps, positioning snipers, reinforcing weak points in the stone walls. They knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't the first time they had been outnumbered. For them, this wasn't just survival. It was strategy. Zura tightened her grip on her knife. She had fought in many battles, but nothing like this. The humans didn't fight with honor. They fought with precision. Every move they made was calculated for maximum damage and minimum risk. And somehow, she was now part of their war. Ross crouched beside her, eyes scanning the jungle. They'll come fast. They'll come hard. But they won't expect us to be ready. Zura exhaled sharply. And you think a crumbling ruin will protect us? Ross smirked. It's not the walls that will stop them. He tapped his rifle. It's us. Before Zura could argue, the jungle erupted. A deep, bone-rattling roar shattered the silence. Then, footsteps. Heavy, relentless. Hundreds of them. The Krogan had arrived. The siege begins. The first wave came in fast, massive reptilian figures charging through the trees, their weapons raised. Zura's breath caught in her throat. There were more than she had expected. Twice as many as before, maybe more. Ross didn't move, didn't panic. Instead, he tapped his wrist device. A sharp beep echoed through the ruins. Then, boom. Explosions tore through the jungle. Trees shattered. Fire lit up the night. Krogan warriors screamed as the traps detonated beneath them, throwing bodies into the air. But it wasn't enough to stop them. The survivors kept coming, their thick armor protecting them from the worst of the blasts. Some were wounded, bleeding, but they didn't slow down. They were driven by fury. Gunfire erupted from the outpost as the human snipers opened fire. One shot, one kill. The snipers didn't waste bullets. Every trigger pull meant another Krogan fell. But still, they came. Zura pressed against the stone wall, watching in disbelief. The humans didn't retreat. They didn't break formation. They fought with cold, terrifying efficiency. She had spent her life fighting alongside Franthi warriors, soldiers trained in discipline and honor. But this was something else. These warriors had no hesitation, no fear. They weren't just fighting. They were hunting. Zura joins the fight. A massive Krogan leaped onto the ruins, roaring as he swung his blade. Zura reacted instantly, rolling to the side just as the weapon crashed into the stone where she had been standing. Dust and rock exploded around her. Without thinking, she lunged forward, her knife flashing. She aimed for the throat, just like the humans had. The blade bit deep. The Krogan staggered, choking on his own blood. Zura didn't stop. She twisted the knife, then wrenched it free. The Krogan collapsed. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing hard. The fight had been instinctual, automatic. It felt different. It felt right. A sharp whistle snapped her out of her thoughts. Ross was beside her, firing into the advancing Krogan forces. "You learn fast," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos. Zura wiped the blood from her knife and nodded. "I learned from the best." Ross smirked. "Then don't slow down." He turned and fired again, dropping another Krogan before they could reach the walls. Zura didn't hesitate. She grabbed a fallen rifle from one of the dead, checked the ammo, and moved to the next defensive position. She wasn't a Vranthi warrior anymore. She was a survivor. The war chief arrives. The battle raged on, but something shifted. The Krogan weren't just attacking blindly anymore. They were waiting. Then, Zura saw him. A figure emerged from the trees, massive even by Krogan standards. His armor was darker, thicker, his scars deeper. Unlike the others, he did not charge. He watched. The Krogan war chief. Zura's stomach tightened. She had heard of him before. Ralkash, the butcher of Salder. He had wiped out entire colonies. And now his red eyes locked onto Ross. The war chief raised his massive hammer and roared. The Krogan forces rallied, their morale surging. Ross muttered a curse under his breath. "We've got a problem," Reynolds called out. "No," Ross said, rolling his shoulders. "We've got a target." Zura's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "That's Ralkash. He's killed more warriors than I can count." Ross tightened his grip on his rifle. Then it's about time he lost a fight. The final clash. Ralkash moved forward, his heavy steps shaking the ground. He raised his hammer, his deep voice booming across the battlefield. "You fight well, humans," he growled. "But you cannot stop us. Your kind is weak. Your time is over." Ross smirked. "Funny. I was just thinking the same thing about you." Then he moved, faster than Zura had ever seen. Ross ducked under Ralkash's first swing, his rifle flashing as he fired 3 precise shots. The bullets slammed into the Krogan's exposed joints, forcing him to stumble. But Ralkash didn't go down. He roared and swung again, his hammer crashing into the stone wall behind Ross, shattering it instantly. Zura's breath caught in her throat. Ross barely dodged in time. One hit, that's all it would take. But Ross wasn't planning to get hit. He baited the war chief, drawing him in, forcing him to attack wildly. Each time Ralkash swung, Ross moved out of reach. It was a game of patience. And humans, Zura realized, had mastered patience. Ralkash made one final mistake. He overextended, just for a second. Ross didn't hesitate. He pulled a small device from his belt, flicked a switch, and tossed it. It latched onto the war chief's chest plate. Ralkash looked down. A small red light blinked. Ross grinned. Boom! The explosion ripped through the night. Ralkash stumbled, flames licking at his armor. He roared in fury, but his movements were slower now. Zura saw her chance. She sprinted forward, her knife flashing. One precise strike, right into his exposed throat. Ralkash choked, staggered, then fell. Silence. Then, cheers. The humans had won. Zura stood over the fallen war chief, breathing hard. Ross stepped up beside her. "Well," he said, "looks like you're one of us now." Zura looked at him, then back at the battlefield. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like a warrior. A human warrior. The human warrior's fury. The battlefield was silent. Smoke curled from the shattered remains of the outpost walls. The bodies of fallen Krogan lay strewn across the ground, some still smoldering from the humans' precise explosives. Blood, dark and thick, soaked the earth beneath them. Ralkash, the mighty war chief, was dead. And yet, Zura felt no relief. Because the battle wasn't over. Not yet. Ross stood over the fallen war chief, his rifle still raised, his sharp eyes scanning the jungle beyond. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't relaxing. He was waiting. Zura frowned. "What's wrong?" Ross didn't look at her. Krogan don't break this easily. Zura's stomach twisted. He was right. The Krogan were brutal, but they weren't cowards. They didn't flee just because their leader had fallen. If anything, they would come back angrier, more desperate. And then, the jungle trembled. A deep guttural howl ripped through the trees, shaking the very air around them. Zura's blood ran cold. That wasn't just a war cry. That was something else. Ross exhaled slowly. "Reynolds," he called. "What do we got?" Reynolds, positioned on the ruined wall, adjusted his visor, scanning the trees beyond. His face paled. "Oh, hell," he muttered. Zura's grip on her knife tightened. "What?" Ross's jaw clenched. They'd brought a Gorath beast. Zura felt her heart stop. The Gorath were the stuff of nightmares. Massive creatures bred for war, part biological, part machine. Towering over even the largest Krogan, their bodies were reinforced with armor plating, their eyes glowing with the eerie red light of cybernetic enhancements. They felt no pain. They needed no rest, and they killed everything in their path. Zura had only heard rumors of them. No one had ever survived an encounter to tell the full story. Ross, however, didn't look surprised. He just adjusted his rifle and sighed. "All right then." Zura stared at him. "All right. That's all you have to say." Ross shrugged. "It's not the first time." Zura was about to argue when the trees snapped apart like twigs. The Gorath emerged. It was even larger than she had imagined. Nearly 4 times the size of a Krogan, its mechanical limbs gleamed under the twin moons, its massive arms ending in razor-sharp claws that could slice through stone. Red cybernetic implants pulsed across its hide, and its mouth, lined with jagged fangs, let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated the very ground beneath them. Its eyes locked onto the ruins. And then, it charged. The monster awakens. The ground shook with every step the beast took. Ross didn't hesitate. Focus fire. The humans unleashed everything they had. Bullets tore through the night, lighting up the beast's armor, but it kept coming. Zura moved fast, dodging as the Gorath swiped its massive claws. The force of the swing sent stone flying, reducing an entire section of the outpost to rubble. "Armor's too thick," Reynolds called out. "We need bigger guns." Ross was already moving, reaching for a small black device on his belt. He pulled it free and tossed it toward the Gorath's feet. A landmine. The beast took another step. Boom! The explosion sent fire and debris into the air, making the Gorath stagger. It let out a furious snarl, its red cybernetic eyes flashing dangerously. But it wasn't dead. Zura's stomach twisted. This wasn't a battle. This was a war. A fight unlike any other. The Gorath lunged. Zura barely had time to react before its massive claws slammed down, missing her by inches. She rolled to the side, heart pounding. Ross and his team kept moving, dodging and firing in perfect synchronization. They weren't panicking. They weren't hesitating. They were adapting. Zura could barely keep up. She had always believed that the Vranthi were the best warriors in the galaxy, that their tactics, their training, made them superior. But now, she understood why the humans had become a legend. They weren't just fast. They weren't just strong. They learned. Every time the Gorath swung, they adjusted. Every time it roared, they struck. They were relentless. Zura's breath hitched. The humans fought like the universe had already tried to kill them. And failed. The kill shot. Ross ducked behind cover, reloading. His calm voice cut through the chaos. "Reynolds, target the eyes. Zura, you're with me." Zura hesitated only for a second before nodding. She wasn't used to taking orders. But Ross wasn't just giving orders. He was leading. The two of them sprinted to the side as Reynolds took position above, lining up a sniper shot. The Gorath turned, its mechanical muscles whirring as it tracked their movements. Then, Reynolds fired. The shot slammed into one of its glowing red eyes. The beast roared in pain, stumbling backward, its movements erratic. Ross saw his opening. He grabbed another explosive from his belt, this one larger, with a blinking red light. "Zura," he said. "Distract it." Zura's instincts screamed at her. Distracting a Gorath was a death sentence, but she had come too far to stop now. She darted forward, slashing at its leg. The blade barely scratched its metal plating, but it was enough to get its attention. The Gorath roared and turned, right toward Ross. Ross threw the explosive. It latched onto the exposed wound left by Reynolds' sniper shot. Ross didn't hesitate. He raised his gun, aimed, and fired. Boom. The explosion ripped through the night. The Gorath's head detonated, sending metal and bone flying. Its massive body swayed, its cybernetic eyes flickering. Then it collapsed. The earth shook as the beast hit the ground. For a moment, silence. Then, Zura let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The end of the battle. Ross exhaled and stood up, dusting himself off. "Well," he muttered, "that was fun." Zura turned to him, still catching her breath. "Fun?" Ross grinned. "What? You scared?" Zura scowled. "No." Ross raised an eyebrow. "Good. Then you're ready for the next fight." Zura stared at him. "Next fight?" Ross stretched, rolling his shoulders. "You think the Krogan will stop now? We just killed their war chief and their pet monster." Zura's stomach twisted. He was right. This war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Ross looked at her, his expression unreadable. "So," he said, "you sticking around?" Zura didn't hesitate this time. She nodded. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't just a Vranthi warrior. She was fighting for something more. She was fighting with humans. And she wasn't afraid anymore. The legend lives on. The jungle was eerily silent. Smoke still lingered in the humid air, curling upward from the ruins of the outpost. The ground was littered with the bodies of Krogan warriors, their lifeless forms a testament to the battle that had just ended. Blood seeped into the earth, mixing with shattered stone and the wreckage of fallen war machines. The Gorath beast lay motionless, its cybernetic eyes flickering before finally dimming. The once mighty creature, bred for destruction, had met its end at the hands of a species that was supposed to be extinct. Zura stood among the ruins, her breathing heavy, her knife still slick with Krogan blood. She had fought in many battles, but none like this. This was not just a fight for survival. This was a statement. The humans were not myths. They were not ghosts. They were warriors, and now she was one of them. The aftermath. Ross crouched beside a fallen Krogan, checking for any remaining signs of life. Satisfied that the battlefield was clear, he tapped his wrist device, signaling his squad. "Status check," he said calmly. One by one, the human soldiers responded. "All clear. No casualties. Ammo low, but we're good." Zura blinked. No casualties. She had fought battles where entire Vranthi squads had been wiped out by a single Krogan platoon. Yet here, a handful of humans had taken on an entire war party, plus a Gorath beast, and won. She turned to Ross. "How is that possible?" Ross didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up, brushing dust from his black armor. "We don't fight fair," he finally said. Zura frowned. "That's not an answer." Ross gave her a sidelong glance, his expression unreadable. "It's the only answer that matters." Before she could press further, a voice crackled through his communicator. "Captain, we have a problem." Ross exhaled sharply. "Of course we do." He tapped his wrist device. "Talk to me." Long-range scanners are picking up movement. Big movement. A fleet. And it's headed straight for us. Zura stiffened. "Krogan." Ross nodded grimly. "Krogan. The war is not over." Zura felt a chill run through her. The Krogan never sent full fleets unless they intended to wipe out a location. If they were sending warships now, it meant they saw what had happened here. It meant they knew the humans were back, and they weren't going to let them live. Ross turned to his squad. "We need to move. Now." Zura clenched her fists. "Where do we go?" Ross smirked. "Where do you think?" The hidden fortress. The humans led Zura through the jungle, moving fast but controlled. Even after hours of battle, they didn't slow down. They weren't just strong. They were conditioned. After nearly an hour, they reached their destination. Zura stopped in her tracks. Before her stood a massive underground bunker, hidden beneath the thick roots of jungle trees. The entrance was reinforced with steel, almost invisible to the untrained eye. This is a human outpost, she realized. Ross smirked. One of many. Zura turned to him. You've been here the whole time. Ross nodded. Humans never disappeared, Zura. We just stopped announcing ourselves. Zura's mind raced. For over a century, the Vranthi believed humanity had been destroyed, that their homeworld had fallen, that they had been wiped from the stars. But that wasn't true. The humans had never stopped fighting. They had just changed how they fought. As the bunker doors slid open, Zura's breath caught. Inside, rows of human soldiers stood at attention. Some wore the same sleek black armor as Ross's squad. Others were outfitted with heavier gear, their weapons larger, more advanced. And at the center of the room, a massive screen displayed the incoming Krogan fleet. Warships, dropships, enough firepower to wipe out an entire planet. A man, older than Ross, with graying hair and a scar running down his face, turned to them. His gaze landed on Zura. So, he said, his voice deep and rough, this is the Vranthi who fought with us. Ross nodded. She's a fast learner. The man studied her for a moment, then nodded approvingly. Good. We'll need all the help we can get. Zura swallowed hard. What's the plan? The man smiled. The same plan we've always had, he said. We remind the galaxy why they used to fear us. The final decision. Zura stood there, staring at the human warriors around her. A day ago, she believed humans were nothing more than myths, ghosts of an ancient war, legends whispered around campfires. Now she had fought beside them. She had killed beside them. And she had survived because of them. Ross stepped beside her. You don't have to stay, he said quietly. You can leave. Find your people. Go back to your old life. Zura looked at him. Her old life. It seemed so far away now. She had spent her entire existence believing strength came from honor, from discipline, from fighting for her people. But here, in this underground fortress, she had seen something else. Strength wasn't about honor. It wasn't about glory. It was about survival. The humans understood that. They had mastered it. She met Ross's gaze, and for the first time, she didn't hesitate. I'm staying, she said. Ross smirked. Welcome to the war. The legend lives on. The alarms blared, signaling the arrival of the Krogan fleet. The soldiers in the bunker moved with perfect precision, gearing up, readying their weapons. As Zura picked up a human rifle, its weight solid in her hands, she felt something stir deep inside her. She had spent her whole life being told that humans were gone, that they were weak, that they were nothing but stories. But the galaxy was wrong. Humans weren't gone. They weren't weak. And now, she was one of them. As the war drums of the Krogan thundered across the jungle, as the humans prepared for battle, Zura allowed herself a small smile. The universe thought humanity had been wiped out. But the thing about myths, they never truly die. And neither did the humans. The end, or the beginning.